Cool.
Let's get this going.
We're going live. Hey.
Here we go.
Hold on, let me check to make sure this is good. I like to have it pulled up on the side.
Yep.
Just in case we get some people coming in, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. Hopefully, if you're tuning in live with us, you're in for a few minutes here of a couple tips, tricks, marketing help, whatever you really need as we're trying to move things around here. Today, we're going to be doing some general Q&A. So as you guys hop in and you have questions about what you're experiencing right now when you're trying to grow your private practice, as you're trying to get marketing up and running, anything under that banner around business, around planning, we're gonna spend some time answering your questions, digging into that. But we also wanted to take a moment as people are hopping in here and people are going to be revisiting this replay when it's provided as a resource in other locations, is how, when you are a single practice counselor, do you do that and actually launch a group practice? How do you bring on your first clinician? What are the things that you need to be keeping in mind? What should you be prioritizing? Anything and everything under the sun that might be needed for you as someone who's just operating just by yourself. What do you need to do to jump into the group practice framework? Why would you do that? How do you make money from that? All of those types of good questions we're going to be digging into, one-on-one here. And hopefully a few of you can drop some good notes as we go along here to answer some questions. And then definitely after the fact, this is a relevant video for now, for later. So feel free if you're catching this a week or a month after, because I know you guys go back and watch these replays, drop a question. We'll hop in and answer it because this is our content piece on starting a group practice. That being said, Attilio, do we work with group practices, and the ones we do work with, what makes them successful?
Ooh, that's a good question. So yes, we do work with group practices. And I think the ones that are most successful are the ones that put systems in place and they consistently check and have accountability for those systems, right? When you're working in a group practice, you have people that you have to manage. And so I think some of the best group practices that we work with are effective at, they're effective at working with people. They're effective at not just working on their time, right? Because your time is great for solo, but you need to effectively work with many people now. And so I think that's probably the number one underlying thing is they've cracked the code on working with people.
And some of the best group practices that we've worked with and seen great results monetarily, what does that makeup look like? What are their margins? What are their revenues? What's kind of the sexy side of owning a group practice?
So this can really vary. This can really vary depending on how you set yourself up as a group practice owner and what kinds of things are you providing for your therapist? How are you employing or how are you contracting your therapists? So baseline, I would consider a group practice is you're not the only therapist. So there's another therapist or even another supervisor. And then you likely have some type of administrative staff or receptionist. And then maybe you have, maybe you're leveraging cash for a few other things that you don't want to spend your own time on. So that to me is like, okay, now you're a group practice. And so some of the sexy things about that is you can start reducing your time needed in the business, right? You're starting to make money off of other people's time. So you're leveraging other people's time. You're using money and other people as leverage, right? So huge benefit there. If you want to make money without like you only have 24 hours in a day, right? So if you want to make more money, that's an option to kind of scale up and grow your financial side. If you want to make more time, you can do that by leveraging other people's time. So you can get your time back. You can keep more of that 24 hours. So not only that, but if you're really good at what you do and you run a group practice, you have the option to scale up the value that you provide for the audience, for the market that you're working with. And so you can create a much larger impact by training and helping your therapist and the people inside of your group learn from you, who's really good. And by providing supervision, by scaling out your time, horizontally, you're able to stretch the value. You're able to stretch the value that you can create for the market. And so really you're just scaling yourself up like crazy. As far as like profits go, it really varies based on how you have yourself structured. I've seen some people only make like 30% margins. I've seen people make like 80 or 90% margins, depending on how you're paying out the therapist, depending on what's being brought in, depending on what you're having to cover, like marketing wise or software wise or office space wise. Yeah. So there's like, that's a wildly huge variable, and depending on how you want to set up, depending on what you want. So I've seen kind of that all over the place. How about yourself? Do you have like have you seen kind of like a good range? I know that it's pretty common for group practices to cover like the marketing, the space, maybe credentialing or panels with like insurance, maybe even some CEUs and a few other like knickknacks, and they'll do like 40% of the total billable hours. And then in 1 year, a therapist is worth like $100,000 to the group. Yeah, is kind of what I've seen. One licensed therapist. Yeah. So that's kind of what the general numbers.
Yeah. An insurance group practice versus a cash pay group practice only, or a mix of that. Those are all going to be very different numbers and very different profitability points. Also different steps to market yourself and make that happen on a different level. One of the things that we talk about is if you're a single practice counselor charging $150 cash pay a session, but typically with insurance, maybe you're getting 120. So we'll go with the 120 number. If you do 25 sessions a week, 48 weeks of the year, you're going to generate around $150,000 of revenue just on your own. That's if you have good systems in place, you have consistent referrals, and you stay full around the 25 client mark a week for most of the year, right? Get some time off, you have some business expenses, but you're definitely clearing 6 figures in your practice. And that's without doing any income hacks, any groups, any courses, anything else. You're going to have a nice salary as a single practice counselor. When you start adding in additional clinicians under your group practice, depending on what your split is, you have the ability to profit anywhere from $30,000 to somewhere upwards of $80,000 per clinician on your team. And start looking at numbers of, instead of capping at maybe upwards of $200K in personal income when it's just you, actually seeing, 1.5 or 2.5 or $3.5 million come into your practice or more if you get a team of 3, 7, 10, 15 clinicians on your team. Certain things become easier too. Marketing can become easier when you're that size because you're known in the community. There's enough people and there are enough ethos around you and your brand that momentum begets momentum and you continue to move forward. So in some ways, some of our best practice owners are only seeing 8 to 10 clients a week. And those are their best clients, the ones that they want to see. And they stay at that. They spend a little bit of time managing their practice, and then they have freedom for everything else. And that's where, not only does that increase your income, but also increases your flexibility and your freedom when you learn how to manage other people. And it's also your own ability to make a larger impact in the community and on the therapists you work with, because chances are you're going to be providing training and resources and support. Not everyone wants to be a group practice owner. You could be watching this and be like, man, I have no desire to ever do that. Great, then don't. Like, legitimately, it's probably not for you then. But there's a lot of people that do. And that's their way of expanding things, of providing more resources. So the rest of this conversation is great. What steps do you need to put in place to actually, hire your first person or hire your first 3 person? And that's maybe where we can go next of, where do you find people to hire? What are the steps we can take with that? And some of those things. One rule of thumb as we dip into that is I always say, if you're going to hire one person, you might as well bring on 3 people. Specifically for group practice owners, it is going to require almost as much time to manage and bring on one extra clinician in your practice as it is to bring on 2 to 4. So 3 is kind of a happy medium. And it's also almost not going to be worth it to try and only fill out 1 or 2 other counselors' schedule. It's cost prohibitive. You have fixed marketing costs, you have fixed software costs, you have fixed paperwork and billing and insurance costs. Great. Do yourself a favor and be prepared to hire 2 or 3 people at the get-go. So that way you can actually move your practice forward consistently with a large enough pool of people that you start having some scale and some benefit that way.
Just to rip off of that, something really big, maybe it's a word, like a cautionary word, is if you are only able to get new therapists, or if you're only able to hire people from your network, then that is a restriction on your business. And you need to find a way to hire people outside of your network. That way you're not their friend, you're not their acquaintance, you're not their family member, you're not their whatever. Like, you need to figure out how you can outreach outside. Not saying anything is wrong with those people, but if you're only ever relying on referrals for employees, that's a huge restriction on your business, and you need to figure out how to overcome that bottleneck, right? We want to be able to fill out 3 people. We want to be able to fill out highly qualified individuals, and not just your friends. Because and I've worked with friends before, and sometimes they've been the best hires, and sometimes they've been the absolute worst hires. And sometimes you don't know that until you just work with them. So that's something to keep in mind. I actually love that point, by the way. If you bring on 1 person, you may as well bring in 3. Super true. Super true. The amount of energy that you're putting in, you may as well bring in 2 or 3 people. Whoever's watching this, I hope that you take that. Like, that's a big nugget right there.
And that's true for other things that you have to think about. If I'm going to do this, I might as well do enough of this to make it worthwhile. If you're going to get 10 therapists on your team, you might as well have 20. And so there's just increments of scale that you might as well hit if you're going to try and hit some version of it anyways. If you're going to be a single practice owner, you might as well try and get a rate above $100 or above $150 so you can keep some level of sanity by earning what you're worth, because that's not something every single person has figured out. I talked to 3 people today that were charging less than $100 per session. Let me just tell you right now, the skills and expertise and the amount of student loans that you acquired or paid out of pocket for to acquire the knowledge you guys have is far more worth being paid than $80 a session or $50 a session. So know your worth. Know your worth if you want to transition to a group practice. There's 2 schools of thought when you're hiring your first person. And a lot of people get hung up on this of like, there's so many details and there's so many things to do if I'm going to like bring on my first person. We'll give you the easy way and the hard way. The easy way is to hire a contractor. This is a 1099 contractor. They are contracted just simply to your organization to fulfill a service. That is the single session consistently. You have a non-compete in there if you really want to with contractors, but probably not. And you're not tied to providing them the be-all, end-all of your business, benefits, and a lot of other things. That doesn't make you a super competitive employer, just depending on various things that you have set up. But it's a pretty simple process to just hand someone a 1099, get them going as a contract, make them liable for their own liability insurance, licensure stuff, if they do or don't be on insurance panels. And then you give them a couple benefits, like maybe you do have an office that they can work out of, or you do have an EHR already set up that they can integrate into that they don't have to pay for, or you do have referrals coming in that you say that you're going to pass them. And then you come up with the split. If you're providing a lot of benefit to them and a lot of things for them as a contractor, well, maybe you're taking 70% of every session, right? And they're walking away with 30. So if they're charging 120, you're walking away with $70, they're walking away with, the rest, whatever it is. A more typical fit is 60-40, either one way or the other way. So you as the practice owner are walking away with 60 and they're walking away with 40, or you flip that the other way and you're walking away with 40 and they're walking away with 60. I've seen more therapists lately when they're launching their group practice for the first time, try and do a 70-30 split. And I can tell you right now, most of the time that's not sustainable when you're first starting out. And that goes back to the cost prohibitive structures. If you only have 2 to 3 counselors on your staff and you're paying a significant portion to fill their schedules out, provide liability, and a lot of other things, all of your costs as a business are roped up in that, and you don't have the margin. Your margin is larger than 30% on that. So that means you're losing money every single session they do under your practice. So keep that in mind when you're running your numbers, that you probably need to have more than 30% of the give when people are doing session under your practice name, because you're taking risk by them being under your practice name, and that's your reputation and your things out there in a lot of different ways.
And taking financial risk too. You're spending money. We've seen people come into our program and they're giving 70% and they're only keeping 30% for their group practice. And sure enough, in 6 months, they're like, I don't know what happened with all my money, right? And we've also seen it where they're covering a lot, like marketing and blah, 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 and software and expenses and location. And then they just don't have anywhere, like they can't grow. You can't grow like that. And so it's just really, really restrictive. Jumping, like make sure you know your numbers, right? Not only that, but pay isn't everything. Like people will come to you and they'll work with you if you have a great environment, if you have a great program, if you're doing some cool things. And so just because you're giving them 70% doesn't mean that you'll have more people who want to work with you. It means you're setting yourself up for failure. And if you fail, if the ship sinks, all the sailors sink too. So if you fail as a practice owner, all of your practice will fail. And so then you got to release everyone and get a restart and do it. So that's something to keep in mind too. There's always what's the saying? There's always someone willing to go broke doing what you're doing. Don't be that person. Yeah, for sure. The more complex way, and this is when you get more established and you're probably larger, is you're looking at W-2. That's providing benefits. That's providing a structured salary that's probably not based off of the hourly rates and some of those things. So that's a whole topic. It's a whole conversation, and maybe we'll produce a separate piece of content on contractor versus W-2. We're just trying to give you some broad strokes here for some of the things that you think about. Contractor versus W-2. You probably want to start with contractors. That's going to be your easy gate and your easy scale up. The next thing that you have to think about is, great, how do you keep your practice full and make money? And that's a marketing and business scaling question. So I'll throw that back to you, Attilio. What's the number one thing that group practices are doing to keep all of their clinicians' calendars full? Because that's what everyone needs, is full calendars. Otherwise, they're losing money. Yeah, something I think really, and this has come up in the last couple of weeks. As a group practice owner, you need to be able to establish boundaries for yourself on costs, because it's your job to not only fill up your clinicians, but it's also your job to make money off of those clinicians, because otherwise the whole establishment, all the benefits you're providing will fall down. And I use that as a preface because sometimes people will try to work in that they need to have a fixed cost, and they'll come in pre-licensed and they'll be like, I want to make $200 an hour. And you're like, if you let them trample you, they're going to trample you and you're not going to be able to fill them out. So you have to be able to set good boundaries so that way you can fill them out. And that was a really specific case from this last week, but I want to put that out there. And I think it's really important to know you need to be able to set some good boundaries for yourself. And if your clinicians are holding you back as a private practice owner, then I think maybe it's time to move on, to find a different clinician. Because ultimately you need to work you need to be able to work with what's best for the team. So with that being said, to fill out, my number one super easy way to fill out is get onto some listing sites ASAP and fill out your calendars. And then when you're filled, raise your rates. And then when you raise your rates, that's when you can start looking at how many people dropped off when I raised my rates. And now do I have the margins to be able to market effectively? Or is it worth it for me to market at price and then get my clinicians filled out? So we've seen it time and again, Josh. I think that you can fill out, you could fill out. You could see 1,000 clients in a month from BetterHelp. You could do that. So you get on some of those listing sites. I'm not recommending that you sit there and stay there. Okay. The big thing here is that you fill out your calendar so that way your clinicians are seeing people and you have cash flow. That's the number one thing. You need to move quick, raise your prices, because we need to get the cash flow first, then raise our prices, see how many people drop off, because it's not sustainable being at the low prices. See how many people drop off. And then once you start settling in at your actual price, the price that the market's going to allow you to sit at, the price that you're sustainably able to work at, the price that's not going to feel like burnout city, then you can start looking at, okay, what are the best ways to market myself? The fastest way is to replace time with money and spend ad dollars. Slower ways, but higher return on investment positivity is usually more organic searches. So like investing in search engine optimization or content creation. Those are all great ways. Creating authority for yourself with universities. The crazy thing about group practices is that you're marketing in two ways. You're filling out your clinicians, but you also have to get new clinicians. So don't forget that too, right?
In the last 2 years, we've talked to way more group practices that need help hiring than they do getting more clients. You guys are savvy. You're going to find the clients, especially if you're a group practice. Your name's going to get out there. You're going to get contracts through insurance or EAPs or whatever you need. So that means if you always seem like you have a wealth of clients, and you never have enough clinicians, that means recruiting is the number one skill that you need to acquire as the business owner. Or you just you pay a headhunter $6,000, $8,000 to go and source you a bunch of candidates and bring it in. Someone's making you $30,000 to $80,000 in a year if they have a full schedule. Pay the $6,000 to get them sourced. Just do it. See how easy it is for the first time. See how good it feels like.
Especially if the recruiters give guarantees or will replace the people if it doesn't work out.
And P.S. if you're watching this right now and you need a connection to a good recruiter, we know a couple. We've liked, they've helped other practices in our program. So don't be that person that's not willing to drop a little bit of cash to get some new clinicians if that's what you're struggling with. There's also simpler ways. There's also cheaper ways, but that's one fast and quick way to solve your problem. I'll use an example of having a successful group practice and turning a single practice into a successful group practice. That comes from when I used to run a marketing branch office that was around sales reps and selling products, right? Those sales reps, right? They would come to us and we would tell them that we would provide 80% of their leads, 80% of the referrals, right? So the vast majority of their time and their schedule is going to be spent talking to people that they didn't have to do any work to acquire. You as a practice owner, when you're hiring a clinician, you can set the expectation that, hey, 50% of the clients that 50% of your schedule or 80% of your schedule, we are going to do our best to fill you out up to 80%. However, if you want to be successful here, we need a set of processes in place to help you go out and find the other 20%. The number one thing that I don't see group practices doing is on their clinician schedule, scheduling 1 to 3 hours a week for referral generation practices. Don't go out and spend thousands of dollars on marketing on a monthly basis. Well, but don't do that if all of your clinicians on your team are spending zero time on a weekly basis trying to generate referrals. That means your entire team is just sitting on their butt doing nothing except for showing up to one-on-one sessions. And unfortunately, there's more to the job if you're trying to run a successful practice. That means 1 hour a week, they're optimizing their psychology today profiles, or researching other listing sites to get on, or spending 1 hour a week going to a local community event, or sending 10 emails to 10 doctors or 10 colleges or whatever it is. But utilize your clinicians 1 to 3 hours a week, which is not very much time, to keep your practice full and fill out that top 20%, which is a lot of times the stretch that's the hardest to fill. And the reason why that's always empty is because your clinicians aren't participating in the work.
That brings up a really, really big skill and a really, really big gap that I have seen. And I think a lot of group practices have tried to replace it with people or systems, when really the big skill that I see that might be missing here, that's going to help you transition from a solo to a group, is leadership skills. So if you are not leading your team, if you're not setting the expectations for your team, if you are not keeping your team accountable, then all of a sudden, and I saw this a few months back. I saw this a few months back. I had someone ask me, Attilio, every time my receptionist books a therapist, there's like a 50% chance that the therapist actually gets a hold of the person and they have their first session. Why is that? And it turns out because the therapist didn't have a solid expectation to get a hold of the client for the first session. And so they were okay with letting the balls drop. But what does that look like for your practice? What does that look like for the experience for your clients that are coming in? What does that look like for the brand? All of that comes back to leadership. All of that comes back to leadership. And there's a million things that fall under the leadership bucket. But that's just one really good example. And setting expectations, just like you were saying just now, Josh, I mean, setting expectations for your team, having them understand that they should be going out there, maybe making themselves a little present, and trying to push a little bit for themselves is good. Like, that's a good thing. Like, they can go out, be present, they can educate the community. Referral generating activities doesn't mean that they have to go out there handing out flyers to people, right? It could be maybe sending an extra text, depending on your modality, maybe it's sending an extra text message to your current clients, just saying, hey, how are things going? Are we still good for our session? Like, just going that extra mile so that way they feel extra taken care of. The step I call in every business is the delight step. It's like that one extra thing that you're doing. No one else is maybe doing it, but it sets you apart, and people really stinking like that.
Yeah.
Like, they really, really like it. And it's the reason why you get more referrals than the other guy. And so that delight step, that extra delight activity, is an expectation that you set as a leader, or it could be a marketing system that you're putting in place. So something to keep in mind as you're transitioning from a solo to a group. Like, these are some of the more important things to think of. As a solo, really, you just need to market and sell yourself effectively. You could really run off the cuff as a solo. There's some skills that you're probably going to acquire as a solo, but as a group, we're starting to tighten that up a little bit. We're creating some systems and we're keeping things accountable. So that was my leadership run.
You're watching this right now and you've got some questions about this, about any other marketing things right now, or if you want to take a second and pause the video, type a question out and drop it if you're watching a replay or something. So that way you make sure something sparked by the group practice conversation, sparked by the, I'm a single practice and I'm not full, but I want to be a group practice, like anything you're struggling with, now's the time to maybe pause, drop it, and get your question answered. We'll talk for a little bit longer here to see if any questions come in and such. In terms of one of the essential skills that you need, single practice or group practice, making that transition is specifically, you need a time on your calendar on a weekly basis. And I think I've been talking about this in almost every video we've done for the last 2 weeks here, because it comes up over and over again that none of our counselors we talk to are doing this. Whether it's 30 minutes a week, an hour a week, 3 hours a week spread out, you need a dedicated time on your calendar where some of the best parts of you can show up, aka not 10 p.m. at night, not 1 in the morning when you can't sleep or whatever it is, but one time a week at 10 a.m., one time a week at 1 p.m. post lunch, whatever it is, dedicated to the things you need to be doing to make that transition. It is a big transition. There's a lot of information that you need to do. So give yourself some credit and some grace and say, great, for the next month, I'm going to set aside 1 hour a week every Monday, or 3 hours a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1 p.m. And I'm going to do a session with myself. I'm going to schedule 60 minutes on my calendar, and I'm going to work on acquiring the skills and setting up the things that I need to do. Whatever I get done in that 60-minute period is what I get done, and I'll come back to it the next time. If it takes me a week, a month, 6 months to get what I need to do to go to the next level, that's worth it. Get the time on your calendar, schedule sessions with yourself. Don't let the forces of the world take that away and let it be another 12 months, 2 years, 10 years before you launch that group practice that you want to launch.
That's a great, it kind of reminds me of this post that I made, I don't know, a couple weeks back about the attitude and the, like, how you have to understand, if you want to create a group practice, I think every group practice owner that I know will say that it was worth it for them 100%, even though they had a bust ass doing it, they'll all say it was 100% worth it. I love where I'm at, blah, blah, blah. Like, after I go through all these obstacles, or even if they're working through all these obstacles, I feel like they always say that it's worth it. They're enjoying themselves. It's always great. Like, they control their schedules. So there's a lot of benefits to running a group practice. And if it's something that you want, you need to have an attitude shift, that paradigm shift, where you no longer are the person that is wanting that thing and it'll happen one day. But you need to shift into the person who deserves it by putting in the time and the effort, blocking out time for yourself, and taking the right actions, not just any action. That's another thing too. You guys have a whole community here. You have access to a bunch of coaches. You have access to other group practice owners. Oftentimes, the simple way is the way. Like, more often than not, even Joshua and I have been finding that sometimes it's just better to just make it super, super simple and see what happens on the most simple scale, because really you don't need to overcomplicate things. You just need to get the reps in on something that's working. And so simplify, book out the time, stop. Like, you're creating more time for yourself by complicating things. And so if this is something that you really want to have happen for yourself, set a deadline, cut that deadline in half, and then make it happen. So that's what I really, really recommend. Make it happen, set the deadline in a shorter amount of time, and then book that time out. If you're like, wow, it would be great to have a 7-figure practice, or I never thought it would be possible to have a 7-figure practice until you guys just said that I could have a 7-figure practice. So if you want to have a 7-figure practice, if you want to have an 8-figure practice, whatever it is that you want to do, it's possible and it's out there, but you need to become that person that will deserve it. Like, you can't just skate by 30 minutes, 10 p.m. Saturday, or it's tentative and I thought about it for that time. Like, you can't do that and get to $1 million. Like, you don't deserve $1 million. Like, you understand that at that point, you don't deserve it. And so you need to, like, put in the work, you need to put in the time and set yourself right. So that way you can become the person you need to be. So that way you can get to that 7-figure practice that you want.
My very first business that I launched, I did like $12,000 the first year that I was in business.
I think that's how much I made on my first year too.
Geez, okay. And it was not the success that I was looking for. A couple iterations before I had my first 6-figure year, my first multi-6-figure year. and some of those things. And so just know that it's a process, and it's a journey, and it starts with showing up consistently far more than it does showing up inconsistently. So optimize for showing up, not necessarily for always getting the result that you want. Because if you show up consistently, consistent results will happen a lot more often. That's for sure. We'll leave you with a couple last quick things here. Number one, if you've got questions, post them in the group. We do have an accelerator for single practices to get you to 6 figures, for group practices to get you to multi-7 figures, mainly focused on business and done for you marketing. So if you have questions about that or what you need for that and some of those things, reach out, drop it in the group, let us know. There's always a way to do it yourself, but when you're a group practice owner, you need the mindset of hiring other people to do things that you're not good at. And that's why we exist. And for everything else, that's why the coaching in the group is available to get you the help you need. So just know that that's there. And number two, really schedule that time on your calendar. And this is a lesson for anyone who's in business right now. If you don't have slots in your calendar on a weekly basis for working on your business, rather than just doing the functions of your business, which is therapy, you're losing, you're going backwards, you're missing out the opportunity to receive freedom from that work. So definitely do that. What else do you got for us, Tilio?
That's it. I think overwhelmingly maybe in the last 2 weeks when I've been speaking to practices that are under 6 and interested in getting to 6 figures, it's always just a skill gap and it's simplifying.
Yeah.
Like if you're looking at more than one thing at a time, you're probably doing too much. And if the thing isn't working for you, maybe you're looking at one thing and it's not working for you. Maybe you're bad at that thing and you need to get better at that thing. And so that goes for people who are working with us. That goes for people who aren't working with us. That goes for everything. So as we're moving from 6 up to 6 and then 6 to 7, that rule applies throughout. So if you're at 6 and you're looking at 1 to 2 channels of marketing, you're looking at blah, 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 and then you want to move to 7, it's the same thing. So you have to have that foundation. So work the foundations. Like Josh said, we're in business here because we're helping out as far as services go. There's always a way to do it yourself. But of course, look out for resources if you need them.
Yeah, for sure.
That's all I've got, man.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys have a great day. We'll answer questions in the chat and we'll see you next week, same time, to talk more about more of these things. Cheers all.